And so at this time, I want to pass the mic over to Pastor Michael Allen. And so please take it away, Pastor Allen. Pastor Michael Allen is the Chief Strategy Officer for Together Chicago, and working very involved in violence reduction and many other things in the city of Chicago.
Well, thank you very much, Nate, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in and to being a part of this very important session that we're conducting for your benefit and our collective benefit in the greater Chicagoland area. So my assignment today is to talk about how your church really can become an essential part of your community. I pastored at Uptown Baptist Church for 14 and a half years, just recently resigned to serve in the organization I co-founded with Dave Dillon, Together Chicago. And so I want to talk about your church because we exist to serve the local church in Chicagoland. And so I know many of you who have tuned in are either pastors or leaders, members in your local church, and we want to really talk about making your church an essential part of your community. When I think about that, I think of back to the men of Issachar. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, it says that these men from the tribe of Issachar, they stood out among all the tribes in that they understood their times and they knew what to do. In times like this, especially times of crisis, rare are the people who understand exactly what's going on and know what to do. And that's why, as other speakers have said this morning, it's important for us to pray, to seek the wisdom of God, the mercy and grace of God, so that we will know what to do and we could do our part. And in some cases, as already has been said, we ought to know what we ought not to do. So there's a warning for us in times where there's such danger to be circumspect, to be wise and discerning, to listen to some of the experts, especially in the health field, who are guiding us so that we know what not to do. But there are also some things that we ought to do and we ought to know about what to do. And so the first session here, the first section of my session is to be knowledgeable, to know your community. If you're gonna have a church that is essential, in other words, one question I remember when I first came to Uptown, somebody said to me, you know, if Uptown Baptist Church disappeared from the corner of Wilson and Sheridan, obviously they're talking about the building, not the people. We all know that the church is both the people and the building, but this person was not a believer, so they didn't really know much about, you know, the fuller understanding of church. But they said if Uptown Baptist Church disappeared from the corner of Wilson and Sheridan there on the north side, this community would really feel it. It would be noticeable, not just from the landscape, but noticeable because of the impact that the people of Uptown Baptist Church makes, as well as that the building itself makes in terms of how the building is used to serve the community. For over 20 years, Uptown Baptist Church gave up what many churches called your fellowship hall. We call it our fellowship hall. We gave up our fellowship hall to become a 50-bed shelter for homeless women. 20 years, think about that, 20 years for 12 hours a day, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, 50 homeless women found a bed and food and hot food and a hot shower and a warm place to sleep, to get out of the elements and to be nurtured and cared for in the basement fellowship hall of Uptown Baptist Church. And then for over 30 years now, 40 years perhaps, Uptown Baptist Church has used its building and its people to feed those who are homeless, serving in our community, who are food insecure. and they come to the church knowing that they can receive a hot meal every Monday night, served by smiling, generous, helpful people. And so it's important to be knowledgeable of your community, knowing the schools, for example, in your community, establishing a relationship with the leaders in the school, knowing the businesses in your community, knowing your church non-profit, the other nonprofits that are there, your business, the businesses, the nonprofits, the other churches, and then know the demographic, the people in your community. Uptown community is one of those communities in Chicago, the 77 neighborhoods. That's probably one of the most diverse communities in everywhere you can count diversity. Red, yellow, black, and white, rich, poor, middle class, over 70 languages spoken in the public schools. And so if you as a pastor or church leader, if you know your community, then you can begin to devise outreaches that better meet the needs of those communities. So know the people, know your alderman, very key person to know in your community, and then to know your CPD commander, your Chicago Police Department commander in your community, in your district. And so be knowledgeable about your community, and that will help to serve you better as you begin to minister to your community. Let's go to the next slide, Nate. Matthew 9, 10 and 12, Jesus was hanging out with the sinners. As a matter of fact, he hung out with sinners both in life and in death, as we all know. And this leads me, this passage of scripture reminds me to be available. Not only be knowledgeable, like the men of Issachar, but to be available as pastors, as leaders in our churches, maybe as lay leaders. We have a 40, 50-hour week job, and then our pastor or other ministry leaders in the church are encouraging us, asking us to give more of ourselves and our time to serve. But speaking of full-time Christian leaders in ministry, I find that it's very important for me to be available to meet with leaders in the community, to attend community meetings, to meet members of your church in your community, to listen to the needs of the community. Sometimes we can allow the church and the needs of the church itself to absorb so much of our time and our attention and our energy and focus that we forget that we are there not only to serve the needs of the people inside the church, but also to serve the needs of the community outside of the church. And so as a leader at Uptown Baptist Church, and then I became a leader in our community because I took the time to meet leaders, other leaders in the community, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, governmental leaders, leaders from the police department, being available, leaving time in my schedule during the week to attend certain community meetings and then to listen to the needs of the community. So being available is very, very important. Next slide. 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10 tells us as the church to be hospitable. Now, I think it was speaking more practically for individuals to be hospitable in your home. When I think about the church home, the church being a place for the community where we can be hospitable to those in our community, I think one of the questions that we have to ask as leaders in the community, leaders in our churches, is what do we have to offer? If we're going to think about being hospitable, what is it that the church has to offer? Well, first of all, we have a huge building. Sometimes it is the largest building for meeting space in the entire community. And people often look to it, that is the church building, as a place that is neutral. And that ought to be open to the community. But again, if we don't have that as a thinking in our minds, then we won't offer, and we won't think that even the church can be a part of providing a needed resource for people in the community to gather. So offer to host community meetings, offer to provide lunch, coffee, or snacks at those meetings for those who come. Offer to facilitate the meeting. I remember when we had, there's a block club in Uptown, there are several, but one of these block clubs was having a lot of issues with gang activity, from shootings to open air drug markets. And the neighbors in the community, especially the condo dwellers, they recognized that that was not good for the community. They felt threatened when their kids were outside trying to play in the park, and drug sales were going on, or drive-by shootings were happening, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was lots of chatter on this website, or this online chat room for this neighborhood community members, and so one of my members lived and was part of that, actually a couple of them, and they invited me to join this chat room so I could learn more about what the people who were not even believers, but residents of the community, what they were most concerned about and griping about, complaining about. And they had the police involved, the aldermen involved, but there was a place for the church to be involved. And as I listened, I thought, we've got to get these people in the same room and just hash out some of the issues, and then start talking about solutions. And God used Uptown Baptist Church and me and some of our other leaders to open up the space of the church for a big community meeting with the aldermen and the folks from CHA, the leadership of CHA, because some of the public housing buildings is where some of the residents live that were causing the biggest problems. And we had those folks come, and everybody gathered inside the church for a solutions-oriented meeting, not just a gripe session and an accusation session, although it did get a little heated, but members of our church were able to quell those arguments, and we got focused on providing solutions. And Vance Henry also came, and he brought the vice mayor, Andrea Zopp at the time, to come, and she walked with us throughout the community, understood what was going on, and then gave directives for some of the solutions presented at the meeting to be implemented by the various governmental agencies. And so again, if we have that mindset of we can be hospitable, then we can provide our space, offer to host the meeting, offer to facilitate the meeting. And you should have seen the response of the folks in the community. They were saying to the neighbors that were members of our church, their neighbors, "Oh, I didn't know that your church was so beautiful on the inside. I didn't know that your pastor was so this or that, or your other members of your church." And they were talking so positively about the church. So whatever negative stereotype they may have had about the church was dissipated, because the church played a role in solving some need and providing resources to solve issues in the community. So 1 Peter reminds us that as Christians, there's a place for hospitality, and the church can be and offer that place of hospitality and be hospitable to help bring about peace in the community. Let's go to the next slide. And for the example, be visible. Here's another injunction for us to be visible. When you think about Jesus and the apostles and their ministry, they were very seldom inside buildings, whether it was the synagogue or the temple. But if you read the Gospels and you read the epistles, most of the ministry happened outside four walls of wherever the church gathered to meet. And so I would encourage leaders to prayer walk your neighborhood, bank locally, patronize local restaurants, join your local business chamber of commerce, so that you then become visible and more visible, and you're not just behind the walls, whether in your office or in your sanctuary or in your Bible study group inside, but you become a unmistakable presence in your neighborhood that cannot be ignored. And so as I walk through the neighborhood at Uptown, even though it's now becoming known that I'm no longer the pastor at that local church, I'm really still the pastor of that community. And I bring other pastors around to the table. And that's just because I'm a connector. I realize not every pastor has the gift of being a connector and connecting others. And so you're going to need to, if you're a pastor and you're not a connector, you need to find people in your congregation that help you make those connections in the community and bringing people together, whether it's the other nonprofit leaders, the governmental leaders, the police, members of the community in block clubs, etc., so that you can be that organizing factor on the ground, bringing people together to talk about problems and focus on solutions and work through that together. And then, of course, by prayer walking the neighborhood, you see things and understand things you wouldn't otherwise see. By banking locally, you have stakes in the neighborhood, and relationships are built there. Patronizing your local restaurants, again, that's just good neighborly practice. And being a part of the local business chamber of commerce, you then can connect with your business leaders in the community. And then again, your church becomes an indisposable fabric of the community. And when there's an issue, people look to you and to the church for answers, and as a place to convene meetings and talk about solutions. And so that's my injunction to you, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. And I think, is that the last slide, Nate? Oh, here's another one. Be resourceful. Sorry about that. Be responsive to community needs. We talked about that. Be resourceful. Create resource guide. One of the things that I did, I basically found out about so many resources, and I basically organized them in a guide, a document that I can share with people. Because how many of you know that knowledge is power, right? My people perish for lack of knowledge, lack of wisdom, lack of knowledge. So this information we've gathered together and then help people, because we know the church doesn't have all the answers or all the resources. No one church has all the answers or all the resources, but we could look around and find out where the resources are and put them together, organize them in a guide for people that'll be helpful, so that they can then, so I give out these resources. Just last 2 weeks, there's a young man that was shot and killed, Amundsen high school student, 16-year-old in the north side. And I together with several other pastors went and ministered to this family. And one of the things we did is give them our resource guide, together with some other tangible help, like a Visa gift card and offers of condolences and prayer and gospel tracts and so forth. But this resource guide has tons of information that they were going to need for the time of crisis. West Haven Park, young man was shot last Saturday morning, right around this time. And we've been ministering to that family as well, together with Pastor Daniels of the First Baptist Congregational Church near the United Center in the near west side there. And so being resourceful, a source of resources to people in need, is so helpful. And then being willing to recruit, train, and deploy the volunteer army. As we've already heard, the church is the largest volunteer army, and we can do that. And then finally, I think we've got one more slide, just a statement. As we wash our hands, we've heard a lot about being wise and discerning during these times. As we are careful to wash our hands and even practice social distancing, which is normal and necessary, let's not forget to also wash others' feet. As we wash our hands, we're still called to wash others' feet as we are able, practicing all the wise instruction as we can. And so I consider myself, and some of us ought to in the church, as first responders, as essential workers on the front lines, just like Dr. Detmer and his medical staff. I'm on the board of Pacific Garden Mission, and I'm so grateful for the Lawndale staff that have been helpful in helping to give frontline service to the men and women at the mission and the children. We've got a guy in prison coming out and in jail coming out. He was supposed to go to the mission last night. Talked to the president of the mission. He says he can't go there, but Dr. Detmer is arranging buses to take guys that wouldn't otherwise be coming into the mission to those hotels where they could be cared for, because the mission is under quarantine and can no longer receive people. First time in the 160-year history of this Pacific Garden mission that they cannot take people in because of this COVID-19. At the same time, we are working together with folks on the ground to make sure that we love people, serve them, protect ourselves, protect them, and get them the help that they need. So as we wash our hands, let's not forget to wash others' feet. And thereby doing, we will be an essential part of our communities. God bless you.